Hello, everyone. Welcome to our YouTube live channel here at VantagePoint. So excited to have everyone joining us today for our top stocks for May. A lot of talk in May about some potential trends coming up. So looking forward to diving into those with you today. So let's go ahead and get started. Before we do anything though, I do want to just take a minute to see who in our session today, I'm going to be checking the comments throughout. So who in our session today is new to VantagePoint. Maybe you've never even seen VantagePoint before. This is a session where we really are trying to provide education about artificial intelligence and how to utilize that in your trading. So this is a training is open to everyone here on YouTube. So wanted to see if we have a lot of VantagePoint users currently in our session today, or if maybe we need to kind of take it back to the basics for those who maybe haven't seen VantagePoint or the power that artificial intelligence can provide here in the session. So while I get my software pulled up, I'll go ahead and give you guys a second to get that in the chat. All right, so hopefully everybody is able to see my screen. Let's just do a quick sound check as well before we kind of dive into any of the good stuff, as I call it. And then we will get started. If you can just make sure you guys can hear me loud and clear, that would be fantastic. And then we'll be able to start rocking and rolling in our forecast. I know that's the stuff you guys want to get to anyways. So while I wait to hear from the sound check, what I'm going to do is going to go over just to make sure everyone's on the same page. Always good to know that everyone is aware there is substantial risk involved in trading. So please make sure that you're not trading with money that you can't afford to lose. Now, during our session today, as I mentioned, this is an artificial forecasting software, VantagePoint, and we're going to be diving into all things AI related when it comes to the assets that we're discussing today. But of course, you know, there's never any guarantees in the market. So just know that there are some risks and you need to be aware of those risks. But VantagePoint can also help you to manage risk along the way, which we're going to get to as well. So welcome everyone. So let's go ahead and keep on rolling here. I always like to kick these off with just an overall market assessment and what did we expect in the markets today? How did things shake out as compared to what VantagePoint was forecasting as well? So a lot of talk about tech stocks today, a lot of talk about some of the Mag 7 stocks as we are in the midst of earnings, if you will. Who in the room trades earnings as well? We'll get to our forecast. In fact, I'm going to pull up the NASDAQ here very quickly. But who is trading earnings? Perfect. Hey, Burl. Hey, Leon. Thanks for joining us today. So glad to have some familiar names in here as well. So excellent. All right. So looks like some of you are trading on earnings. Some of you might be avoiding earnings. Whether you like earnings or you like to avoid earnings, knowing how to navigate through those scenarios and circumstances in the market can be, key. So we certainly want to make sure that that you know how to navigate through those, and using artificial intelligence can help you with that too. So we'll certainly take a look at some of those Mag 7s with some earnings that were released here recently, right? So lots of shifts in the market. Let's take a look at the NASDAQ again, being kind of big on tech right now. We've seen a lot of movement happening there. And so why not evaluate and see how VantagePoint forecasts for that? Now, while I do want to get into our forecast, I do want to circle it back because it seems like I do have some new users to VantagePoint, or some traders who are maybe just seeing VantagePoint for the first time. That's the way I should put it. So let's go ahead and take a look at just how VantagePoint works, because we're going to be talking a lot about what we would call the 4 points of confirmation. So please understand, if you don't have VantagePoint, you still want to have confirmation in your trades. Confirmation is going to equal confidence, no matter which way you shake it. All right. So whenever you're looking at entering into a potential position, you kind of want it to convince you to take the trade. trade, right? Now, again, I'm not a licensed advisor, so I'm not telling you to take a trade here. In fact, I won't be giving you any trading advice, but I will be training you on how to read the technical analysis here in VantagePoint, specifically the predictive technical indicators. So let's take a look at just a brief overview on how to read the technical indicators here in VantagePoint. Now, you might see a consistent theme here, red and green. So as you see, we do have a blue crossover here. And let me grab my pen very quickly so that way I can make some drawings for you guys along the way here as well. All right. There we go. It'll make it a lot easier for you guys to see what exactly I am referencing on the screen. So if you'll notice with VantagePoint, when you see this blue line that runs along the screen is an incredibly powerful blue line. This actually represents not just the market that we're looking at, in this case, Wingstop, right? But it also represents the top 31 markets that are impacting Wingstop. How are they pushing, pulling, and driving the market? So we'll take a look back kind of behind the hood here for just a moment. Many of you have seen this. If you are a VantagePoint family member, you know you have the access to see the markets that are impacting things like Wingstop. So here's our sort of parent market, as I'd like to call it, our target market, if you will, with Wingstop. Now, all of these others around here are markets that are impacting Wingstop, and that's what is powering that blue line. That's actually part of our patent process. We have two patents on the software, one of them being the inner market analysis that you see here. So we're not just looking at an individual asset, no, because the markets are so connected, especially these days. Think about the global markets. In fact, they have been for decades, but just now with the technology, we're really starting to be able to see behind that veil. And VantagePoint's been doing this for decades. So if you look, we see, tech resources, okay, maybe First Trust, right? But Dillard's, like, would you ever have expected Dillard's, the, store, to impact something like Wingstop? Maybe not, right? So all of these hidden connections behind the scenes, VantagePoint is doing a deep dive. Its neural networks go in and look at all of the millions and millions and millions of data points to find what is actually impacting Wingstop. How are these markets then pushing, pulling, and driving the price action of Wingstop? And that's the real power behind true artificial intelligence, and the true artificial intelligence that powers the technical indicators here at VantagePoint. Now, keep that in mind. That's just the blue line, right? So there's a lot more, and we're absolutely getting to that as well. So when that blue line crosses below the black line, just like this, you can see the trend turns red. In fact, we have a crossover back here, but you can see the trend turns red. So when that trend turns red, you can expect some potential bearishness in that trend, in that market. That market is now shifted from bullish to bearish, and you may want to be very cautious, or if you like to play the downside, that's okay too. Just switch tactics, reverse position, but the key here is that you are shifting strategy. So knowing when to shift your strategy is a key piece of trading, and knowing when and having confidence to do so. That's where the artificial intelligence and the signals from VantagePoint just take it 10 notches above, right, than anything else that I've seen. So as we see, we are looking at our red trend. Now, a couple of pieces of confirmation, because I mentioned there's going to be confirmation that's going to equate to confidence, right? So if we have our crossover here to the downside, then we can look down at what we would call our neural index. Our neural index is going to help us better see the price action. So what is price action expected to do over the next 2 days? So here we have our trend or timing indication up top in our chart area. We have the neural index confirming price action is expected to also go down. And now coming to the third point would be our predictive differences. We can see the predictive differences are all trending down very quickly, which means that the strength behind this bullish trend has now shifted to bearishness. So whenever we see those predictive differences, we can see strength pulling to the downside. So 1, 2, 3 predictive indicators giving you confidence and confirmation here. Now there is a fourth point of confirmation, which is going to be your predictive trade candle. Now that's going to show up daily, so I'm going to jet all the way over to the right side of the chart here so we can see that predictive trade candle. That's the gray bar that we see here that gives us our predictive range for the day. So whenever we see that predictive range here with green shading on the bottom, that's going to indicate an expected higher high, and green shading on the top and green shading on the bottom, higher high, higher low. You get the point. Green for up, red for down. It's really that simple. You want to make sure that all four of those points line up to give you enough confidence in that move. So let's take a look at current day and see what we see shaking out here. Yes, absolutely, Anjali. We can certainly take a look at stop losses. Thank you so much for your questions. That just helps us to keep this training rolling and making sure that we're covering, things that are going to be important to you guys, but layering on the artificial intelligence on top of that as well. So we will absolutely take a look at stop losses. Glad you mentioned that too, because that's what our predictive trade candle can certainly help with also. So let's take a look at our current setup here. Now, the question here is on 428, when we see that blue line crossing over the gray line here, we can see the trend turns green, right? So when that happens, we're looking for confirmation. This is our first indication of the trend expectancy of bullishness. Now let's look down at our neural index, and here we see, yep, we do have a bullish neural index as well, and then come down to take a look at our predictive differences, and we can see all three of those trending up as well, and we would have expected to possibly see a bullish predictive trade candle in addition to those other 3 points of confirmation. So check them 1, 2, 3, and then 4 with the predictive trade candle, and you've got a lot of confidence in what to expect over the next 1, 2, and 3 days. All right. So again, green for up, red for down. Make sure you have confirmation, and that should give you some confidence to make some, informed trade decisions. That's the goal here, right? To make informed trade decisions, not just hopefully guess right, right? That's like 50-50, right? Flipping a coin. Certainly we can have better accuracy using the VantagePoint software, which is actually up to 87.4% accurate. So if you want to know more about that accuracy, you can always just let us know. We'll drop the link below if you want to find out more about VantagePoint as well. So let's continue on. Let me just kind of clear my drawings here on our screen. All right, excellent. So now that we know we have a bullish confirmed trend here on 428, what do, right? Well, that's where you as the trader decide what is your strategy here. All right, and again, I'm not here to give you any trading advice. You know how to trade. As a trader, you want to trade in a way that makes sense for you. That might not be the same strategy that works for the next person or the next person there. There's hundreds and thousands of different trade strategies out there. But the base of all of them is timing and direction. Even when it comes to options, right? Timing and direction, that really is going to help you to decipher on what trade strategies you would likely employ during this setup. So let's take a look further at our current setup here. So the next day, managing the position. All right, do we still have a green trend? Right? So we're still expecting bullishness, right? Fantastic. Good. I'm glad everybody agreed there, right? Sort of a rhetorical question, but green for up, red for down, right? So, and I say green for bullish, red for bearish, green for up, red for down, because there's really no bad scenario in the market. The market moves, and it's that movement that allows traders to make money and have plenty of opportunities in the market. So if you don't trade to the downside, that's okay. Just go find a different opportunity. If you do, fine, fantastic. Then you have plenty of opportunities in the last couple of months. But if you only trade to the upside, then we can find opportunities that are moving bullishly, just like we see here in Wingstop. So even when we see our bullish crossover here, see the blue line crosses the red line right here, we can confirm with the neural index as well as our predictive differences, right? So we have that setup that we talked about. So here we have crossover, neural index, bullish predictive differences down here at the bottom, telling us we have nice, good bullish strength coming into the trend. And lo and behold, we have a nice bullish run, even if you waited to the next day to enter, right? And navigating through some of this even until we get another crossover here. And you've got a nice 8% potential move. All right. Now, of course, everyone's going to be a little different. So, if, give or take, you can patronize this just a little bit, getting in a little lower or higher. But based on your strategy, just using the crossover itself from crossover point to crossover point, we can see that there is potential to really navigate through some of that volatility in the markets. Now, for those shorter term traders, right, we can also switch this to a shorter term view. All right. So very adaptable. All right. So let's talk about the different views that we have in VantagePoint. Really what this is going to do is give you a different forecast, a shorter term forecast, all the way working towards a more conservative forecast. Now, I have what we call our medium term crossover right now. That's our medium term view. It's kind of that sweet spot in the middle for swing trading, because that's what VantagePoint was designed for, is a swing or position style of trading. So the medium term crossover is what I have currently on the screen and what we just reviewed. If you're a shorter term, maybe you like to stay in just a couple of days or maybe just overnight, you can select that short-term crossover to help you navigate through those quicker movements in the market. So even on the shorter term expectation, we see where we had that crossover, right? We see that we are confirming with the neural index. We're also confirming with those predictive differences here and using that short-term, very sensitive crossover, which actually looks out 1 day into the future. So this is a 1-day trend forecast. It's looking out 1 day to see if the artificial intelligence expects that trend to continue out over the next day. All right. So as we can see, it remains green, remains green, remains green, remains green. Now, watch, it still remains green even when our neural index is red. And that's helping you to navigate through those small little speed bumps in the market, right? Because a trend doesn't just move in, a linear fashion. It doesn't move from one direction to the other, in a straight line. No matter how we want to look at it, the market does not move in that linear fashion typically, right? So unless there's sometimes where it, to the downside, but I digress. Let's get back to our bullish trend here as we look at our neural index. Now, if we don't have the points of confirmation, then you have confidence to manage that position, staying through some of that pause and price action. Now, if you wanted to exit out, maybe you are shorter term, then that's okay too, right? Then you take your profit targets when you hit them. But VantagePoint is guiding you through that crossover, through that trend, right? Maybe you get out when the neural index turns red. Everyone's going to have a little bit different trading rules, but the beauty here is that you can create trading rules based on the artificial intelligence. So you're no longer guessing at the strategy. You now have a set plan to proactively trade the markets versus just trying to react to the whims of, however it's going to flow. So as we can see here on our shorter term crossover, we had a crossover on 424 for wing, and we had a bullish neural index here. We also had the predictive differences trending up as well. Now we can see here that wing continued up. Our predictive moving average is continuing to slope to the upside, giving us a nice confident bullish reading over the next 1 day throughout that trend. All right. If you switch over to the medium term crossover, which I'll switch back just for a moment, we can see that trend continues to grow on 428. Remember, our short-term crossover happened on 424. So with it being a little bit more sensitive, you can get in a little earlier with the shorter term crossover, but because it is more sensitive, it is a little riskier, shorter term expectation there. All right. This is where we start to get into some customization. What type of trader are you? You can really utilize VantagePoint to your own specific trading preferences and setups, and even scan for those types of opportunities. So for those of you who are going to ask if there's a scanner, the answer would be yes. And I hope we'll have time to get to that today. So let's take a look at that long-term crossover, which would be our 3-day trend forecast. So short term is a 1 day. Medium term is a 2-day trend forecast, looking out that 2 days. And then long term is a 3-day. I'm going to flip over to that long term crossover, and we can see we had a crossover here, 428, maybe even just yesterday on 430. If we, zoomed in real close, we probably see that the full crossover happened on 430, giving us nice confirmation and confidence that over the next 3 days, we would expect that bullish trend to extend. And lo and behold, I do believe Wing was up. Now, of course, we do have earnings here as well. So that's what this little flag is down here at the bottom. All right, we'll jump into earnings a little bit later, but I think this is a nice overview as far as how the software works. Does anyone have any questions on how to utilize the crossovers with the neural index, the predictive differences, and the trade candle to make sure you have enough confidence, enough confirmation to convince yourself of that trade? Easy decision making, right? You want the facts. That's always going to be key. All right, so let's take a look at some additional assets. I told you we were going to look at the NASDAQ. Now that you know how to read the software, it should be easy. All right, so on the NASDAQ, again, we can see that we do have a bullish crossover on the medium term that's confirmed. Remember, confirmation is key. All right, because look what happens here, and I'll show you a spot where that confirmation matters, okay? That confirmation matters because when we get this crossover here on 414, we have a bullish neural index, but take a look and someone tell me what my predictive differences are doing down there. You can see the predictive differences are in opposition of the bullish crossover. So that right there is telling you, hold on, wait a minute, right? We could start singing a song, but I'll spare everyone. That's going to tell you, hang on, there's a little bit of a yield sign here because we have some weakness coming in. So be very cautious at this crossover. It might not be the right time. All right. That's where confirmation can help you avoid making a bad trade decision. All right. Sometimes the best trade you take is the one that you didn't. I will say that until my dying days because the confirmation is going to be key. When you can trade with confidence, you can trade with less emotion, all right? And that is why VantagePoint is so powerful because it allows you to rely on the data. It allows you to rely on the predictive forecast to make your decisions rather than just based on what you maybe think or, heaven forbid, maybe feel, right? So emotional traders are dangerous traders. Sorry, everybody. I know that I'm sure somebody has gotten caught in that once or twice where you got emotional on a trade and it just, it blew up, right? And unfortunately, that's a very expensive lesson. And that's what we want to avoid here in VantagePoint. And in doing so, that's why we have the confirmation and the confidence to make those trade decisions using the artificial intelligence. All right. So let's continue on. Let's see. I had a few questions come through, so I just want to double check here real quick. Okay. How many points we suggest away from the entry point? Okay, perfect. Gotcha. All right, so some currencies. All right, GBP, USD, Euro USD. So just in case anyone is wondering, we have some questions on some currency markets as well. And yes, we do forecast for currency markets also. So we can certainly pull those up as well. Now, when we're talking about stop losses, I'm going to zoom in on the NASDAQ here. Let's just go ahead and do a quick analysis here so we can see what we've got going on recently with our current trend. So again, looking for those points of confirmation. The question I have here is always, we have a crossover, right? That's the first indication. All right. Our second indication is going to be that neural index followed by the predictive differences. All right. So check them 1, 2, and 3 here. Now, hopefully we would have had our predictive trading range as well. There's a way to go back and look at that. We can cover that in just a moment, but we would have had a bullish predictive trade candle there as well, giving us our 4 points of confirmation. So with that, we know that we have strength coming into the NASDAQ. NASDAQ is, of course, going to be very heavy in tech as well. A lot of the Mag 7 on that also. So taking that into account, what areas of the market at that point might you be, looking at, right? That answers a huge question for, I'm sure, a lot of people, right? Just where to start your search in the market. What area of the market has money flowing into it? Which markets do not, right? Which areas have money flowing out? That sort of sector rotation, if you will. And so being able to identify the areas of the market like the NASDAQ or even looking at the S&P itself can be very vital to getting a compass on what direction to kind of hedge your bets, if you will, because the reality is trading's all about stacking the odds, right? And we're here stacking the odds with our 4 points of confirmation. So let's take a look, and we see that our trend has remained bullish this entire time on the NASDAQ, even as, yes, we approach some resistance. So I do have verified support and resistance on my screen right now. It's I tend to not look at it without it, but there are some indicators that you can, add to VantagePoint that are optional, and many traders do because they know the power in the additional forecasts and the additional indicators. But even using just our 4 points of confirmation, we can see that we do have a continuing bullish trend here on the NASDAQ, with our crossover and our trend and our neural index do have some slight weakness on our short term, but look, it's never crossed below. So here is what I'm going to do. I'm going to switch back to our short-term crossover so you guys can see the blue line is still above the green line. In fact, that blue line is still trending up. So this short-term expectation is still bullish out the next one day. Now, keep in mind, guys, this is on 4:30. All right. So this was yesterday. This forecast was available last night at 6:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. All right. So in case I haven't said predictive enough, right, this is where you can see the predictive forecast really shining, is the fact that we have this predictive trade range on 5-1. You're seeing all of this information the night before. You want to talk about being able to create a plan around your trade strategy. This is how you do it. And artificial intelligence is the only thing that can really do that for you, especially with the amount of information and the amount of data that needs to be analyzed to really get accurate forecasts like this. So as we see, NASDAQ coming on up, all right, continuing our bullish trend. So where might we kind of have confidence in the markets, right? Let's take a look at the S&P. I always like to look at the major markets as well. I'm going to zoom on in now that you know how this works here. Before I do that, anybody catch this, right? That big downturn in February. I'm sure some of you felt the impact of that, right? Hopefully not too bad if you're a VantagePoint user, because you saw that coming ahead of time. And there are very, very, very powerful ways to navigate through this, whether you're using the short-term crossover and you do like to short the market, then there's plenty of opportunity to take a short position here. If you only trend or trade bullishly, then great, take advantage of some of these shorter term swings in the market. But this is going to help you navigate through that. We can see where the trend is red. We can see where the trend is green at these points. We're just coming down to look at our points of confirmation, everything trending down. Right? Here we go. 4 points of confirmation. Everything coming up, right? Again, 4 points of confirmation coming down so you can avoid major disasters like this. All right. So again, I repeat, not only is this great for finding opportunity, but also managing risk as well. Knowing when to shift your strategy. That's part of position management as well. And, some of the most successful traders will tell you, because they've told me, that the most important part of any trade strategy is position management. It's kind of where things are made. It's that make or break scenario, right? So, all right. So as we come into the S&P, we're seeing a very, very similar scenario shaking out on the S&P here as well. So do we have our bullish crossover? We do. In fact, we have that back here on 423 on the S&P. All right, and we are continuing that bullish trek up. We have all three of our predictive differences coming up here. Let me highlight this for you. Crossover here, bullish neural index, and predictive differences all trending up simultaneously. Great, you've got confidence there. What do? Well, hopefully you're saying if you trade bullishly, you're going in looking for some bullish opportunities unless you trade the futures, which obviously you can do that as well. All right, so where to next, right? Where to next? If we knew that the forecast was going to be, bullish on some of these major assets, we can even go look at some of those major assets that would typically follow some of the indices, even the ones that, most people think are fairly volatile. We'll just take Tesla. Now, listen, guys, I pulled up Tesla already because it never fails. I always get a request for Tesla. So you know what? I thought I'd just beat you guys to the punches this time around and pull up Tesla for you here. Now, here's an amazing piece about Tesla. Even in a fairly volatile market such as Tesla, we can even look back to look at the amazing forecast here in VantagePoint. And this just highlights how powerful this software really is. Even, jumping back further, but we'll spend most of our analysis here on current day. So we can see the downturn that happened here back in February. I've got February on the brain because that's when most things turned around. But we can see Tesla, in fact, turned around much sooner in December. And that's something that, not many people saw. Oh, it's going to come back here, right? How many thought this was the end of the bit of correction here, right? If you found yourself caught in that, well, you would have then had the courage to avoid this to the downside here because of the forecast. We can see that it shifts back to the downside right here. And if you were even looking at that shorter term indication, I'm just going to flip back over to the short term and taking advantage of those short term bullish moves. You've got a bullish forecast there with confirmation down here, right there on 114. See the green neural index coming on up, right? And then avoiding this to the downside, unless you wanted to take some shorter term trends in the midst of that, which you can if you are a shorter term trader. If you're not and you like to swing, well then great. Look, you avoided all of that, right? So, or you took a short, right, and still made money on the downside. The slide down can be fun, right, if you know how to work it. All right. So what do we have now, right? What do we have coming up on Tesla? We can see we do have a bullish forecast that crossed over here. Now, keep in mind, guys, this is after earnings, all right? Earnings here, right? Let me get this out of the way. Here we can see our earnings forecast. We actually give an earnings accuracy on our earnings AI index as well. But we were after earnings when we saw this bump up. In fact, 3 days after earnings. So typically after earnings, you do want to give a little bit of a grace period of about 72 hours. So, with that being said, after that 72-hour window, when we see the trend kind of resume its way, kind of find its way again, then we can see where our crossover, our bullish crossover happens here, confirming with the neural index, confirming with the predictive differences. And at this time, we have a continued bullish trend. Now, approaching some resistance is, of course, but do we have enough strength to really push through? Our trend is saying still bullish at this point. So maybe you're just managing positions, right? Maybe up against resistance, you put in some tighter stop levels. Maybe, you peel off a portion of the position, sort of that scaling out scenario. There's a lot of ways to manage the risk here. But the key is knowing when you should take action. And this is where our VantagePoint software is just navigating us right through that bullish trend, right into it and right through it. And as a swing trader, you really can't ask for more. Just tell me what this trend is going to do over the next 1, 2, and 3 days so you can manage it accordingly. And that's exactly what we have happening here. Now, if we'll zoom, well, we can keep that out. Also, we could also look at a version of seasonality as well. So many of you might know who Larry Williams is, right? VantagePoint works very closely with Larry Williams, so we do have some of his proprietary indicators here in the software as well. So is anyone using seasonal analysis in their forecasts or in their assessment? I'd love to kind of just see a hands of who's already using seasonality and then who will use it after this session, right? Because the markets do move in a fairly seasonal trend, meaning they tend to follow that same trend year after year after year after year. Now, some markets more than others, but we can even see here on Tesla, you guys can see that the Larry Williams seasonal is that green line right here. So when that green line is moving up, what is Tesla doing, right? And when that green line is moving down, what is Tesla doing? Well, do you think that that would give you a heads up into the trend, especially if you could look back a year or maybe even out into the future, right? So those key pieces, you can push even seasonality out a little bit further on the chart as well. So seeing the seasonality layered on top of the predictive moving averages, layered on top of the neural index, layered on top of the predictive differences can help you to see whether or not this market is typically moving down during this time of the year. So when you do get a crossover to the downside like we see here, and that seasonality is rapidly descending, it's hard to question what the market's going to do next because the artificial intelligence is so good at forecasting for it. All right. So as we can see here with Tesla, it does follow a seasonal pattern, right? Now, we can look at other markets as well. The seasonal pattern can be overlaid on just about any market. So let's go on over to Meta as well. And someone, before I forget, let me just pull up, what was it? GBP USD. All right, one of the major pairs. Gotcha. My keyboard's in a little different place. Sorry, so I didn't want to mistype here. So let's pull up GBP USD and Euro USD as well. So let's go Euro USD. It's right here. I'm just going to pull that up from our major pairs here in the Forex as well. All right. So before I get to any other stocks, this question came in on GBP USD. Now, if you're looking at currencies, any of the pairs, it also might be advantageous to look at the dollar index as well. Similar to when you look at stocks, or if you trade stocks, you would want to look at the futures because the stocks are typically going to follow those futures markets. Why not just look at the leader of the pack? Yes, go and look at the individual asset as well, similar to what we did on the NASDAQ, the S&P with Tesla, right? But when it comes to currencies, we can look at the dollar, especially if you're trading the major pairs, which are always going to be against the dollar, guys. By the way, for those of you who are not familiar with Forex, it is the world's largest market. So a lot of great opportunities in Forex, but you're going to use the indicators the same exact way. So even if you are not familiar with Forex, you can still read this chart with me here because we can look at the dollar index to see we do have some potential strengthening on the dollar index here as well. So with that, you would want to certainly make sure that you have confirmation down here from our other indications as well. And this is where then you can come in and take a look at your Forex pair. All right. So do we have strengthening on this trend? Not quite, right? With the dollar strengthening, we would expect GBP to start trending down, right? So we have a bearish neural index and the predictive differences are all coming down. This was a nice, long trend here on the pound. So if you're at profits, again, this is totally up to you. But when we're at resistance, like what we see here, I'll just gonna point this out here, at resistance like this, right? And yes, we're still green on the trend, right? But we're also seeing that predictive moving average start to come down. So you be very cautious at this point, cautiously optimistic maybe. I don't know if optimism is a great term at this point because we do see a lot of weakness coming in. In fact, all three of the predictive differences are trending down here as well. But we are still in that bullish trend. So then that becomes a position of risk management. You should be looking at this perspective or at this trend from the perspective of risk management, right? Does that help to answer questions? And maybe you use the predictive trade candle to do that as well. So if you, let's just zoom on a little bit closer here so we can see that predictive trade candle. We're expecting the predictive trade candle to be down as well. So when it comes to those 4 points of confirmation, our trend is bullish, right? But we have Our neural index is bearish, our predictive differences are bearish, and the predictive trade candle is bearish. That tells us that 3 out of 4 of those 4 points of confirmation are in fact trending down. So you may want to be very cautious there. In fact, we get a very similar scenario happening back here where we do have a bullish trend, but the neural index is down, predictive differences are either down or sideways. So a bit of more of a consolidation happening here on the long term. And you can see that with the trend line of the blue predictive moving average. So even if you exited out here because you saw that weakness, well, if you were in here and even out here, then, let's do this together, right? Got in somewhere around here, pulled in somewhere, let's even say maybe here, right? You saw the weakness starting to happen here. Maybe you got out the next day or got stopped out. Still a fairly nice move. So we have, the ability, oops, that's what happens when you get a little click happy, right? You open things you didn't mean to, but we still have the ability to navigate through these market conditions and navigate through the trend based on your trade strategy, right? If you run who doesn't like a lot of risk, well then, you hit your profit, you take your profits and run. If you're okay with kind of navigating through some of this, then maybe you do have potential to run a bit higher after we fail off of this resistance. Might be a little bit cautious there. Does that answer your question on the pound dollar? Perfect. All right. So moving right along, it would be the same thing on the Euro USD, right? Our front pair is going to be our major currency pair here. So we can see long on the euro until we get some dollar weakness coming in here. And here we in fact do have a crossover to the downside on the euro. And so we see and I'll zoom in so you guys can see this a little bit closer, but you can see the blue line is now below that gray line, right? It's been in consolidation for a while. So if you weren't already out, then this would be, an opportunity for a short here as well. Take advantage of that dollar strength coming in, which we saw here on the dollar. So now we've not only gotten our confirmation from the individual market that we looked at, but we're using the currency as well as further confirmation for that strength. So we're just stacking the odds here in your favor, right? And that's the power of the predictive analysis, is being able to stack the odds so you can prepare your hand for the day to come. All right. So let's take a look now at some of our other markets. We are approaching kind of the end of the hour here. Gosh, time flies when you are having fun. We could look at charts all day long, I swear, if they would let me, but gotta eat and sleep at some point, right? So tell a day trader that. So let's go ahead and look at Meta. So someone tell me, what we're seeing here. If you can, I'd love to kind of get your feedback to see how actually easy this is to read, especially for those of you who might not have seen VantagePoint before. All right. Yeah, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to start asking for ticker symbols, because I know sometimes it takes a minute for those to come through. So the last 10 minutes or so, we'll go over some additional ticker symbols as well. Let's take the next 5 minutes or so to go through our analysis here, and then we can dive into some live analysis on whatever you guys want to pull up. So go ahead and start typing those in. I'm going to go through Meta. I'm sure Meta's on one of them. So if you see it already pulled up here, PLTR, Oracle, we've done Wing, right? So we've already evaluated most of these. We're going to go through these other three, Meta, Palantir, of course, right? It's like the new Tesla, and Oracle. So we're going to go through those, but if you have other ones you want to evaluate the last 10 minutes or so, go ahead and start typing those in now. So what we'll do is start here. So on Meta, we had a crossover already on 424, right? On the bullish crossover. Great. We had 4 points of confirmation. It's as Daniel, maybe you guys have heard him speak on our live sessions here, it's going to wash, rinse, repeat, right? So check 1, check 2, check 3. Did we have our 4 points of confirmation? We did, including our predictive trade candle trending up at that point in time. So what we can see here is our confirmed bullish trend. Now, whenever it comes to earnings, I'm going to take some time here to go over the earnings here. We can see what the estimate is that is expected. All right, and this is our earnings AI index here, as well as the earnings flag. So it's going to give us some additional information on earnings. So if we look at the estimates, 5.22, that's what's expected. The date here is April 30th. The time of day that the earnings announcement is going to be released is after market close. That's AMC. Just in case anybody forgets, there is a little info button right there. So you don't have to remember all of the abbreviations. VantagePoint's fantastic because it'll give you all that information. Now, you can also see that DMT is during market trading, before the open or after market close. So after market close is what happened with Meta. All right. So with Meta, the aftermarket close on April 30th. So that means that on April 30th here, we would have looked at the day before. All right. If you look at Meta the day before, all right, we're going to look down at the neural index because remember, earnings is a fundamental play. All right. So high risk, high reward. Some of the technical analysis sorry, I got a little tongue tied there. Technical analysis is not always going to apply to earnings because it is a fundamental play. All right. But what will apply is expected price action. All right. So price is always going to be key. So if we look at our indicator for price action, remember that's the neural index. That's this red and green banner that runs along the bottom of our screen here. So when we look at Meta, we take 2 days before. Remember, the neural index is a two-day indicator of price. So we'll look back at 429, all right? So whatever the date earnings is, if it's after market close, we'd look back the previous day and we'd look at the neural index. That neural index is expecting bullish price action. So what were we expecting on earnings? We were expecting bullishness or price to go up on earnings based on the forecast and the earnings indicator here in VantagePoint. So with that information, you know, if you like earnings, fantastic. You had a great opportunity there. If not, then you know to avoid that time of the market at least. If you are not incorporating some sort of earnings analysis into your trade strategy, then be careful because you can get burned. If you are not assessing what's happening during earnings at least 7 days before and at least, 3 days after, that's again, that earnings grace period where a lot of things can happen. A lot of volatility starts to pool into those markets during earnings, especially the big movers, like the Mag 7. So you do want to be careful around earnings. You better have a strategy around earnings. It is, again, a high risk, high reward type scenario. But there are ways to obviously, exploit that earnings call as well and really have some great opportunities, but you do need to make sure you know when they're coming so you don't get caught off guard. And that's really the whole premise around VantagePoint. It's just making sure you don't get caught off guard by anything. It's making sure that we are seeing what's sort of lurking around some of these blind, scary corners in the market. And that way, when it jumps out, you said, yeah, I already knew that might happen. So you had a plan in place to overcome it. And that will help, again, to keep that emotion at a reasonable level because now you just have a strategy to overcome some of those scenarios as well. So that's Meta, right? We can take a look at Meta. We were in a bullish trend. We were expecting bullish earnings. And lo and behold, guess what? It did exactly what VantagePoint said it was expected to do. So that's kind of a ta-da or maybe an aha moment for some of you. So let's take a look at PLTR as well. All right, good. We've got some ticker symbols that came in. Sorry, guys, I'm just kind of trying to keep an eye on the chat and run you through the forecast as well as we walk through this live. So we've got gold, EVLV, SPX, PLTR. Oh, lucky for you, PLTR is already up here. So let's dive into that next. Anybody wishing that they would have caught The uptrend on PLTR. Can I get a show of hands maybe, right? No sad faces though, all right? There's always plenty of opportunities in the market. VantagePoint can help you find them. So again, we do have scanners and what's called IntelliScan to find these types of opportunities that you're seeing, like, Palantir or Meta or Tesla. You can actually look for these setups in the indicators to better identify opportunities in the different areas of the market. So if we take a look at Palantir, we can see we had a crossover on 4.9 here. We in fact had the short-term crossover the day before here on 4.8, but again, we can see that clear crossover on 4.9. So even if we wanted to sort of patronize that a little bit, you can see we did have a clear indication on 4.9. So let's take that 4.9 date for confirmation. We can see we had that bullish trend. That's check 1, right? 2 here on our neural index, and then our predictive differences were all trending up as well, all 3 of them together. So when they're sort of moving in a pack like that, we know we have more power. They're kind of led by what I would call the team leader, which would be the short-term difference. That short-term difference, again, anytime you hear short-term, is going to be a little bit more sensitive in the software. So we do have that confirmation here on 4.9. Now let's jump back over to our medium-term crossover to manage that potential bullish trend at that point. And here again, we do see strengthening in that trend coming in with a crossover then of the medium-term crossover on 4.9, confirmation there on 4.10. We still see our bullish neural index just riding and navigating through this trend. Again, it does stay bullish here. Notice we do not have a crossover here on the medium-term cross. All right. So again, managing that trend coming on up, we can see that we continue bullishly as we maintain our trend all the way on up. Hopefully, maybe just during this period of sort of consolidation or pullback, if you will, you're navigating through that trend. Now, I'm hopefully not going to blow too many minds here, or maybe everybody's, but I'm going to put the triple cross on our chart as well. So the triple cross is another predictive crossover. All right. And this is actually one of my favorite crossovers because of the amount of information you can get from PLTR or from the triple cross on PLTR or any asset. In fact, but if you notice, we cross above what we would call this T cross long level. This T cross long, all 3 of these lines, guys, are predictive moving averages. In fact, predictive exponential moving averages. So they're weighted more heavily to the most current information. So what we see is that we have a crossover above, price action crossing above that T cross long and holding strong for 2 days. So here we have our break and we have 2 days to confirm above that T cross long. So beautiful thing about that is now this T cross long level becomes a very dynamic level of support for this trend. So with a dynamic level of support, it's going to adjust and it's going to move based on price action. So it kind of gives you sort of that moving target, if you will, so you can see where that's expected to be. Now, when we talk about a trend that comes up and hits resistance, see how far extended away it is from that T cross long level? Well, that's a bit of overextension, if you will. And so oftentimes when things are at a max or an extreme, especially in the markets, right, they do have a tendency to pull back. And that's where you would see that sort of reversion to the mean. Well, what happens here is that support level, that triple cross or T cross long level, provides that level of support, which then we can see bullish strength coming back into the trend, helping us to navigate and saying, boom, like a trampoline, off to the races we go for the next run of this trend. Again, this is where trends don't always move in that linear fashion, but how are you navigating through some of that volatility? And so very easily with VantagePoint, we can see we've got clear crossovers with confirmation on the 4 points of confirmation here. and then navigating through once you're in that position with some longer term position management activity like what we just did on the triple cross. So all very, very important when it comes to any aspect of your trading is being able to navigate through some of the recent volatility, whether you're just taking advantage of those quick short-term moves or whether you want to help navigate through to see if it's going to be something bigger or just something a little shorter term, right? If it had crossed below that T-cross long level here and broken and continued to have bearish strength here, I'll give you the opposite scenario, right? Obviously, this didn't happen, so just a hypothetical. But if we were to have continued to break, then you would have potentially just exited out, avoided yourself the heartache of a major loss like this, right? Because you already had the signal that, hey, this is likely to reverse to the downside. But that's not what happened here. We had strength coming in, so clear indication of a potential bounce off of that level. Now, of course, let's go ahead to the next one. We'll pull up Oracle. All right. So as we see with Oracle, we have a very similar, again, big in tech because that's what the markets were navigating us to. That's the beauty of just kind of riding the trend, riding the wave of the market is identify where that money is moving and follow the money, right? That's the old adage that still rings true today, right? So we can see we have a crossover here on 424 navigating on up through the trend. Even once we start to hit this resistance, we can clearly see that we're able to break resistance with a break and 2 confirmed closes above telling us that we've officially broken through that level of resistance. It's not as strong as it once was. So we now have that break. Now, of course, taking into account the fact that we are still in our bullish trend, we can see that our trend, so I'm just going to check some of the chat here, but we can see our trend is still bullish, right? We do have a little bit of weakness here as we approach maybe that resistance level here, but still continuing our potentially bullish move here. And I think Oracle ended somewhere, I know it's ended way above, it's like 145 or something like that. If somebody wants to check that for me, you can. But again, continuing, we actually broke that high here today. And we're actually able to stay above and within that bullish trend, which is exactly what was expected. Now, could you at this point have seen a little bit of weakness and, said, all right, well, let me manage this accordingly. Let me maybe move up some stops, profit protection, because if you listen to the forecast, we did have a bullish trend. Yeah, you do want to manage risk throughout your trend. But you also want to make sure that you're trading based on your trade plan and your trade strategy. So what does your trade plan say at that point? When you hit resistance and start to slow, are you exiting out or are you staying in? You're just moving up tighter stops on those positions. You can use the predictive trade candle to do so because guess what? Using that predictive trading range, this is what our low was expected to be. I'm going to put my crosshair right on there. In fact, I'm just going to use my tool tips. I'll turn those on here. And hover over, we can see that the predicted low was 138.43. So looking at Oracle, if we see the low days range today was 145.34. So we got nowhere near that lower range. You can, of course, set your stop maybe a comfortable distance from that low range because it is expected to come down and hit that range. In this case, we did not. We were bullish, but hey, your bullish expectation, we still expected a higher high and a higher low. So as far as a trend forecast, as far as a higher high and a higher low, we do see that happening here as well. So again, just another example where VantagePoint can help you navigate through while still managing your risk accordingly, using those predictive levels to help you even set stops or potential profit targets as well. So let's go ahead and take a look at some of these other ones. We're running out of time here, but that's all right. Like I said, I could stay here and do this all day. We won't, don't worry, but we'll have to wait for our next live sessions. Let's take a look at gold. GLD is what was asked for. Ouch, right? Sorry. I'm sorry if anybody is feeling or experiencing the pain here on gold, but we saw this coming. In fact, we have a short-term crossover on things like this where we see weakness coming in. You can see we had a short-term crossover way back here saying, hey, guys, just be very careful. Now, this is where I'm going to go ahead and switch on the triple cross, because if you were long gold, we're expecting that reversion back down. Remember about 5 minutes ago when I said when things are at an extreme, they have a tendency to revert in the opposite direction. There's a pull that sort of gravitates them back to the mean. And that here is where we see a rapid movement in price here. You know, as things of tariffs news and other news in the markets were coming out, gold tends to be sort of a safe haven asset, if you will. So we had some rapid movement in gold, but could we sustain that expectation? And we can see that then when our short-term predictive difference starts trending down, right, then this is where we start to see that strength in gold just kind of crumbling, if you will. So with that being said, we did see that drawback down. Potentially, could we be coming down to hit the lower T-cross long level? Remember now, though, this is a level of support too, right? So with this level of support, where are we expected to land? And we were actually broke just below that today. I think at what, 297.46. So at 297 here, we've broken below that T-cross long. We've broken a key level of support here as well. So we'd be very cautious, but hopefully you already saw that coming with some of the other crossovers. Look at the short term that happened back here, right? Nothing indicating any sort of bullishness here in gold. So, you know, the expectation was, of course, bearishness. Even on the long-term crossover, it hasn't crossed over yet, but we can see that coming, the predictive moving average coming down. And with that, we have weakness. And then this is a similar scenario that we looked at before, where we had, you know, 3 of the 4 predictive indicators giving us a bearish indication. In fact, if we count our crossovers, we actually had 7 out of 8 indications trending bearishly. So when you stack the odds in such a clear way, it's really hard, you know, not to see exactly what's most likely to happen that next day and be prepared for it as well. So again, if you are not a VantagePoint user or not currently using VantagePoint, we can drop the link to the chat. And don't forget to like and subscribe too, because these sessions are made up of your questions. So, you know, we want you to know when we're going live on here so we can go through more live analysis just like this on ticker symbols that you guys are asking for. So let's go ahead to the next one. Somebody had asked about EVLV. Let's take a look. Doesn't look like we currently forecast for that ticker symbol, but sure, we could look at the SPX. It's going to be a very, very similar, or the SPY. It's going to be that's the S&P. Right. So we've pretty much so done that analysis. We're expecting some potential bullishness up against resistance, some possible weakness. So a little bit of caution, bullish, cautiously bullish. Maybe that's probably the best way to put it on the S&P. If you want to go back and rewatch this later, we did a breakdown of the S&P, which would be almost a mirror image of the SPX for you as well. So let's take a look. Last one that was requested was Hood. So sure, let's go ahead and jump on in. Any particular questions on Hood, or just an analysis here? All right. So what we see happening here with Hood is, of course, we've been in a bullish trend. We did have a bullish forecast starting with the short-term crossover. Actually, back here, our first indication was on 4.9 with our points of confirmation as well, right? That's always going to be the first thing we look at is, do we have a crossover? Is the neural index confirming that crossover? And then do we have predictive differences moving up in the same direction? And then looking at your trade candle as well. So if we then, let me just remove some of my drawings. If we then kind of push through here, at this point, it's up to you whether or not you want to stay on the short-term crossover for a short-term move, or whether you want to then switch over to the medium-term crossover for more of a position management as well. Now, earnings, of course, is going to be a little risky because, we have forecasted earnings the right direction only 59% of the time. So VantagePoint's going to give you its full accuracy just specifically around the earnings. All right. That's what this earnings AI index is for, to give you the accuracy on earnings. So I believe it did finish down today, but it finished right just below that predictive trade candle as well. So did we, I don't know where the low was, days range was 46.53. So 46.53. I'll try to get as close as I possibly can, guys, but close enough, right? We can still see that we had a higher high than the previous day, which, was, I mean, it was a down day, but you can see the neural index here was bullish. So we were still expecting a higher high, which in fact, we did get a higher high, and this went all the way up to 51.30, right? So if we take a look at our earnings index, right, we would look back one day just like we did before. Were we expecting bullish price movement? Yes. Did we get it? Yeah. The day's range was 46.53 to 51.30. So we jumped all the way up, right? Higher high and a higher low. So that is bullish movement if we look at the day over day. So if we, that's again, key to the neural index is looking for that higher high and higher low for that bullish price movement over the next 2 days. Now, if we come back and take a look at the trend, were you wanting to stay in over earnings? That's always going to be a key. If not, then you might have gotten out a couple of days before earnings, right? Maybe when we hit this previous resistance level and we start to see weakness coming in as well. That might have been a key if you avoid earnings. Again, earnings is always going to be a bit of a riskier play. So make sure that you're navigating and you have some risk strategies around that earnings play as well. And that's going to be key as we come into May. I think the most important thing about May is recognizing that these larger trends are going to need some real backing too. So, we're talking about the major indices. If you're in Forex or trading the currencies, you're going to want to make sure that you're looking at the dollar, making sure that you have good confirmation for some of these longer trends. Mid-May, we do start to come into some potentially bullish seasonality on a lot of these trends as well. So I would be expecting, some great potential opportunities, but again, using that compass to know where to look is going to be key, and what markets really have that money flow coming into them. And VantagePoint's very good at identifying those for the futures markets, the ETFs, so breaking out the sector as well as the individual stocks also. So thank you so much for joining us on our live YouTube today. This is always such a treat to get to, jump on and really work with you guys live in the software. So if you guys have questions, please let us know. We're happy to answer down in the chat. Just drop your questions in the chat, and we'll take a look at those for maybe even the next session coming up next week. So looking forward to seeing you guys on our next live session. Have a fantastic rest of your day.